Hey, Morgan, the Federal Reserve is expected to hold rates steady at its meeting this week en route to an expected September rate cut, and respondents to the CNBC Fed survey seeing a three-way tie in the race to replace Fed Chair Jay Powell. Here are the Fed expectations. 100% say no cut in July, but 27% think the Fed should cut. That reflects some agreement with the two Fed governors who many think might dissent at this meeting. 65% expecting the cut in September. The chance of recession falling to 31% from 38% in June and 53% in May, amid more clarity on the tariff impact, along with somewhat better GDP, now at 1.4%, up from 0.8% from the May low. Take a look now, the current rate outlook from the Fed, from respondents. 4.4 is the current, goes down by about two rate cuts in, this year, two more next year, showing the Fed is still remaining above the neutral 3.3% rate, even with a new Fed chair. But who that next Fed chair will be, well, that's anyone's guess. We have pretty much a three-way tie here. Kevin Warsh at 24%, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent at 24%, Hassett at 22%, and then Fed Governor Waller at 14%. Bessent has said the president could pick a new Fed chair as soon as December. That would be just a couple months earlier than either former Fed chairs Bernanke or Yellen were nominated. The Powell's tenure or term ends in May, Morgan.
Okay. Well, Steve, stick around, because we're bringing another guest into this conversation. My next guest says that there is one candidate who stands head and shoulders above the rest of President Trump's shortlist for Fed chair. Joining me now, Paul McCulley, former chief economist at PIMCO, currently an adjunct professor at Georgetown's McDonough School of Business. And Paul, it's great to have you on. Who would that candidate be that stands head and shoulders above the rest?
For me, it would be Governor Chris Waller. I was looking at Steve's chart. You had three that are effectively either in the administration or very political, and then you have Chris, who's a sitting governor. And I would be in, if I had my druthers, in the Chris Waller camp, for the very simple reason I think that he is a incredible monetary policy scholar and a practitioner. He has been a Fed governor for the last 4.5, 5 years. But prior to that, he was the director of research at St. Louis, which is a bastion of research within the system. And prior to that, he taught monetary policy and finance for decades. I think he's extraordinarily qualified for the job. He knows the institution incredibly well. He serves in a number of committee chairs within the Fed and running the Fed. And I think that he's a man of backbone and conviction, that he says what he believes, and what he believes is rooted in sound economics. So he would be my choice, even though he is last on Steve's list from the survey.
Okay. Steve, want to get your thoughts on tomorrow and the focus that seems to be percolating here of a possible double dissent. There's an expectation that Governor Waller could dissent with the decision not to cut tomorrow and to basically hold steady, and that perhaps Fed Vice Chair of Supervision Michelle Bowman does as well. We haven't seen a double dissent from Fed governors since what, 1993?
That's the latest. That is what we think. 1993 is what the history shows, Morgan. Look, I wouldn't say that double dissent is a foregone conclusion, because there are ways to finesse that. The way it's been done in the past is by putting stuff in the statement or otherwise commentary that would kind of ameliorate or otherwise buy off the defense, so to speak, the dissent, so to speak. That's one possibility. But Morgan, I am interested in this idea here. If you look at our Fed survey, we have 100 basis points of cuts built in. But notice what the 10-year is forecast to do, which is almost nothing. So what we're talking about here is a pretty strong steepening of the curve in the next year. And even with the there you can see right there what happens to the funds rate over time. But if you look at the 10-year forecast, it just goes down to 4.25. So it's an important question as to whether or not the Fed cutting rates would ultimately bring down rates on the long end.
Okay. So, Paul, I'll put that question right to you. Would it bring down rates on the long end? And perhaps in the nearer term, what are you going to be watching, or what are markets watching the most tomorrow, whether September's in play?
I can answer the second question first. Is yes, since September is in play, and I think that they will actually paint the tape for September tomorrow, which could minimize the number of descents down to one. But to your more existential question of the slope of the yield curve, I concur with the results of Steve's survey. And it really brings home that the whole issue right now is for the Fed to validate what the curve has already done. We have put a nice slope in between the 2-year and the 10-year of 40, 50 basis points. So when you look at the yield curve, at 390-ish for the 2 and, 430, 440 for the 10, that makes a lot of sense for me. What doesn't make sense is the 4 3/8 policy rate. So essentially, the easing to come will be what I call recalibration 2.0, of bringing down the policy rate and in the process resloping the yield curve. Recalibration 1.0 was 100 basis points last fall from 5 3/8 to 4 3/8. And I think the next leg of the normalization process will be another 100 down to, call it, 3 3/8, which would then reslope the entire yield curve. So I think the yield curve and the level of both the 2s and the 10s is where it is because of rational expectations that the Fed is going to go back to neutral. That's all perfectly fine.
Okay.
But for those pining for massive declines in long rates, I have to remind them you don't get to go to heaven twice for the same good deed.